Hello and welcome to SLP Full Disclosure. I am your host, Jennifer Martin, and today we are welcoming Dr. Alaina Davis, and we are going to talk about sports concussion, treatment, assessment, and cultural competency surrounding it. Before we get started, though, I want to tell you about our sponsor and a reminder that this episode is sponsored by AMN Passport. We all know that life can get busy, and that's why AMN created Travel Healthcare's highest rated mobile app that helps you find, book, and manage your next healthcare assignment all from the palm of your hand. AMN Passport puts you on the fast track to your next travel job. Instant job notifications are available when you download AMN Passport today. All right, before we dive into this episode, let me tell you about our amazing guest. Again, we have Dr. Alaina Davis, and she is an associate professor at Howard University and also the owner of Overall Neuro Rehab, LLC, and a certified brain injury specialist trainer. She has expertise in cognitive communication disorders associated with TBI, and Dr. Davis's research lab, the Center for Cognitive-Communicative Skills, CCC Skills, focuses on adolescents and adults with sports-related concussions and the process for return to learn, play, and activity. With the CCC Skills Lab, she also serves as the Lead SLP for the Howard University Concussion Management Team. Dr. Davis's work has a significant focus on the cognitive and communication styles of adolescents and adults from racially and ethically diverse backgrounds and implementing cultural responsiveness in assessment and treatment. So this is, you've not been bored, Dr. Davis, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I mean, just even your bio itself is very cool and shows that you've done a lot of really remarkable things in your career as a speech pathologist. And I always just like to start with, tell us a little bit about your professional journey and what even led you into this field and to where you are now.
It's kind of interesting. When I was in undergrad, I actually took a career personality test at the end of my freshman year because I wasn't that sure of what I wanted to do. And speech language pathology came up as one of the top 3 professions that I may be interested in. The other 2, I think, were like teaching and nursing. Okay. And I didn't really think I wanted to do either of those 2. So I took a few classes and I fell in love with it. And so this was at the University of Houston. That's where I got my bachelor's from. I did not realize that I had to get a master's degree until the very end.
Surprise!
So I wasn't there. I don't know what I was doing when I was going through the program. And so I wanted to be sure that this was what I wanted to do. So I worked as an SLPA. And then I went to Southern University in Baton Rouge to get my master's. And that's where I actually fell in love with neuro because I was all about working in schools with kids before. But when I took the classes like I think it was neuroscience and aphasia and dysphagia, it just blew my mind, like learning about the functions of the brain. And so I pursued my CF in a sniff and then realized, I think I have some more questions. And so I think I'm going to apply to get in a Ph.D. program. And that's where I ended up going to Howard University. And so I finished there in about 2014. And then I started my business in about 2017 and just been working in neuro pretty much ever since.
Wow. So this was like meant to be. I always think this is why I love this question because most of us had never heard of speech pathology. And I have heard from others that took a test similar that told them they would be good at this. And they think, what is that? And then look into it. And sure enough, it's this great fit. And I also love that you say you didn't know you needed a master's and then you went on and got a PhD. So obviously, like continuing to learn and education sounds like it's in your blood and very important to you.
Yeah. And the thing is, when I was in high school, I thought I wanted to be a doctor. And then I took this health occupations course and I was like, I am not going to school for that long. But apparently
Joke's
it was
on
in
you.
me to do it anyway.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you did not become a doctor, because what you're doing is your work as a speech pathologist is so valuable. And so it sounds, and I also think it's really interesting, because I do feel like sometimes we go into the graduate program and we think, oh, I want to work with blank population. I think it's such an important reminder to just keep an open mind, because then you find this love of neuro. And then once you really said, okay, I love this, what led to then your specializing in concussions? Like what was that transition like, or how did that happen?
So, at Howard, we have a graduate course specifically for traumatic brain injury. It's called Seminar in Traumatic Brain Injury. And I was trying to figure out what area of neuro I really, really wanted to focus on. And when I learned about TBI specifically, more so of how the after effects can impact a person functionally, that's what touched me the most. So it was like, okay, these are people who, different than aphasia, right? Where they still can communicate pretty effectively and, do a lot of different things, but they may have these other kind of almost awkward like communication styles or even behaviors that can just really affect like how they can progress in their life. And then learning about CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, that was showing up in football players. Because at this time, and when I was in the doc program, this is where it was really starting to come out about in athletes, but also in service members. And so they were doing a lot of like correlational type studies. And so just learning about those things and knowing that they weren't always aware that they had something going on or who could help them with it. And so that really made me want to jump in and be like, this is the population for me.
Oh, that is so cool. And yeah, and the CTE is a whole nother, and we could do a whole nother podcast on that. That's a very interesting. And now, thinking about what we've learned in that, but I'm going to stay focused on concussions because I could otherwise I'll keep you here for 24 hours. With your current research, tell us a little bit about what you're doing in your research specific to concussions.
Yeah, so my role on the concussion management team at Howard has been extremely helpful because I get direct access to the student athletes. And so right now, the study that I have going on is examining their cognitive communication skills, post-concussion, then also looking at correlations between those skills, their cognitive learning styles, and then their academic learning strategies. So my sample is primarily student athletes. Any athlete, doesn't matter the sport or whatever, I take them all. Okay. But we also do a closer investigation of the cognitive and communicative style trends that are present in those who identify as Black or racially and ethnically diverse, so that we can start to help to eliminate some of the gaps that we have right now.
That is so cool. And so do they have to, in order to participate in the study, have had an identified concussion, or is that not a factor?
Well, so yes and no. We do take some baseline data. So any athlete, we're already giving them the baseline assessment tool that they take when they come into the sport. But once they experience, or if they experience a concussion, and they come to me regardless of whether they're going to be in the study or not, and then I get their permission, if their consent, if they want to allow me to use their data.
Gotcha. So some of them are coming to you for speech and language services, and then that's where you can say, hey, this is also something that would be available for you to participate in if you want to.
Exactly. It's like a convenience sample,
yes.
pretty much. Yeah.
I was just going to ask.
Every once in a while,
go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
every once in a while I'll get someone that, like sometimes there's an athlete that's like, I really feel like maybe I might have ADHD. And they'll send them to me to get tested. So it's been an interesting road.
Yeah, that is so smart, because you do then have this, because I was going to ask, how did you get the word out? How do you but they're coming to you. So it's like, and then you can utilize this to hopefully, have the outcomes to then be able to support this group later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's easier because this population is one that is not very likely to enroll themselves in a study.
Kids and teens they're not super motivated for that sort of thing. You're right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have an average age of the student athletes that are in the study right now?
Yeah. And I think it's sitting at about 20 years old.
Wow.
Because we get all ranges. We get them from freshman year all the way up to athletes can go past the senior year into their first year of grad school and still participate in sports. So we've had that whole range.
Okay.
But the sophomore tends to be the highest pop that I get.
Oh, interesting. And I know you said all sports, but is there one that you get more from than the others?
Ooh, women's lacrosse. I've seen quite a few.
Really? Okay. I was thinking football is, I think, the first thing that comes to my mind because of the hits to the head, but that is interesting.
Football is one of those, I'm still really working to get that, get that buy-in as well. Yeah. And sometimes I think that population tends to be the least likely to want to admit that maybe something has happened. Yeah. But with what I also see is I primarily have female participants as well, because the female students, regardless of, how they are identifying, they tend to be the group that says something is not right. Something doesn't feel right. And I'm having a hard time, more so than the males.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Even like, when they're less likely to go to the doctor unless usually somebody tells them to and other things. But that is really interesting. I would not have thought about female lacrosse. With this research, and then I want to dig into the rest of what we're going to talk about with concussions, but what are you expecting to do with the data, the outcomes of this research? Where is it going to go?
That's a great question. So it focuses heavily on the assessment factor. And I think that in this area of sports concussion, a lot of us researchers are trying to find the best methods for assessment, which is quite tricky. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But what I'm really hoping is that the articles that come out of this research will, one, open people's eyes to the differences that exist between people. Also, under a better understanding of cognitive learning styles. That's something I learned about in my doc program. I could probably do a whole nother segment on that too. But I feel that it is a very important part of being able to connect with your clients if you can understand the methods in which they use to communicate and to problem solve. And we don't talk about that enough. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to find some really good trends that will open up more discussions about looking at those things in our practice.
Yeah. And then as the cultural competency piece, is that a big part of the outcomes too, is to see just even, as providers, what are we doing to improve in that area?
Yeah, so cultural competency, cultural sensitivity, cultural appropriateness, cultural responsiveness, all those terms. I tend to use responsiveness a lot because it's action oriented, right? But yeah, that is a huge part. That was at Howard, that's something that's embedded in you when you come through the door, whether you're there in the master's program or in the doc program. And the biggest thing that I also saw when I learned about TBI were the gaps and the disparities that existed. And so one of my goals is to try to eliminate that as much as I can.
Yeah, it's going to be so powerful. And I really love that you're focusing solely on it, really sports concussion, because there is a very common place to get one. And I think it will drive these, I mean, hopefully, and I'm sure you all are thinking some of this too, that we know better, we have more education. And then, this can be something that if you are a coach, if you are a player, if you are a parent of a student athlete or the athlete themselves, you have more information about this, and knowledge is power. And so I think it's really cool that you're focusing on this group, because they are very likely to have a concussion at some time, sounds like.
Very likely. Yeah. Or more than one.
Yeah. Oh, and okay. And we can follow up after this, because we put in the show notes, because I'd love to have the listeners know where, when the study is completed, or there's more, where they can follow up and find more. But we can talk about that, where we're going to put information to the end. So, okay, you also noted too just the assessment process. So when a student comes to you, and do they have they already received a diagnosis from a doctor that they have a concussion, most likely, or what is it when they first come to you? Where are they usually at?
So they come to me, they're supposed to come to me within the first 24 to 72 hours.
Okay.
Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
So, in many cases, they will have been given, this baseline assessment. Well, not the baseline, but the other part of the baseline, like the impact, or we used one called Excellent Brain for a little while. So a computerized testing that will give you an idea of whether there's been a change since their baseline. And it has a tracking for their symptoms.
Okay.
So they may be meeting with me, but also the team physician at the same time.
Gotcha.
So they'll come to me first for a consultation. And we'll just kind of see where they are, because sometimes, depending on the symptoms, if they're too severe, it may not be an appropriate time for testing.
Gotcha.
And then some of them, it could be so mild that full testing might not be appropriate as well. Might just be more monitoring. Yeah. So it just kind of, it just kind of depends, but it all kind of happens at the same time.
Gotcha. And so do the coaches, they obviously know about your program. And so is that protocol almost that, hey, if this happens, this is what we do next?
Yeah, so it's written into the protocol that
great.
The athletic trainers will, they'll work with the athletic trainer. The athletic trainer will then send me the information about each student. And then from there, we're kind of communicating with everyone.
This is so cool. I wish every university had something similar, because and I'm sure now of course know how many of these would just go just undiagnosed, and then, down the road, all of a sudden you're seeing all these ramifications that could have been addressed in that time period that you're initially seeing them. So
yeah, it's very true.
Yeah. But then hopefully some of the outcomes can help other universities see the benefit of this. And then this will be more of a common practice versus something that not everybody has.
Yeah. Especially having an SLP on board.
Yes.
That's a key.
Yes, because we have, again, I always say from the neck up, that's our, that's our area, right? So, okay. So going back to assessments, when they come, I'd love to know just, what are some of the formal measures that you use? What are some of the informal? What does that look like? And I know it's probably not one size fits all, but for the most part, what do you look at?
Yeah. Yeah, so and like you said, it's not one size fits all, and we haven't identified any gold standards. You'll see that in all the literature. There's no gold standard.
Gotcha.
And one of the reasons for that is that it's also very tricky because mild traumatic brain injury, a lot of times the symptoms or how they perform, their cognitive impairments could be very mild. And so they also can perform extremely well on standardized tests. So it can be really, really hard. But one, having access to the computerized tests like the IMPACT, those are really great. We can administer that, but that can also be administered by the athletic trainers. And that's data that you just have access to. But also you can give, as speech pathologists, you can give them inventories like the Mayo-Portland Adaptability Inventory. It's a self-reporting tool, but it's also nice because you can give it to like their coaches, their teachers, their family members so that they can put in input about them. I also really like the R bands. I talk about that one in probably all of the classes and sessions that I do. The repeatable battery for the assessment of neuropsychological status.
Good job.
And the update is nice because it can be given to someone as early as 12 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I like this one because it's repeatable. It has multiple versions. You can give it multiple times without worrying about the test learning effects, I believe it's called. And so this is good too, because this population, those who are younger, they may experience cognitive changes more frequently than a person who is an older. And so they may need to be tested more than one time in a year. And so the R bands comes in really helpful for that. And it looks at their memory, it looks at their spatial skills, which is important for athletes, that visual spatial. And it does like some cognitive flexibility. It doesn't necessarily give you a lot about language and communication, though. And so in those realms, it is a little more difficult to find really good tests. But if you've ever read any of the works by like Jessica Brown, Leon Terkstra, McKay Solberg. So there are some tests that are a little older, but they can still give you good information. Like the scales of cognitive ability for TBI, the SCATB, or the brief test of head injury. Now, I will say that you do have to be cautious of some bias. There's some age bias because those tests are from the 90s. So some of the materials may not be that great. And then there are some like cultural bias when it comes to like some of the, like if there's proverbs section, they may use phrases that aren't that familiar and things like that. But we tend to use a lot of tests from the neuropsych world. So like the digits forward and backwards and things like that. But we also want to make sure that we are including things that will test their language and communication. So I like to do a mixture. If I do the R bands, I'm not just going to do the R bands. I'm also going to do a test that is designed for speech pathology as well. So we can look at language demands on top of the cognition.
Wow. So it sounds like there's a lot more resources than I would have thought. However, I think it's really interesting that you point out there is no gold standard. And I'm wondering, is it because no two present the same? And so it would be hard to have that standard? Or what do you think is just not enough information or research has been done?
Yeah, so even though there's been research done for quite a while, I think the area of sports concussion is still fairly new when you consider the long term of research, right?
Yeah.
But I do believe it's the case that no two present the same. I'm seeing that even in my own data collection. But also the test, it's hard to create a test that can work for everyone.
Yes.
And there hasn't really been any new tests in neuro that have come up. And so a lot of our tests, the populations that were included in the samples aren't representative.
Yes.
And the world has changed so much since the 90s, right?
Yes.
And so there's a lot of different factors that come into play when it comes to that. I think that we may be able to get to a place of gold standard, but I think it's gonna take us a long time.
Yeah. Well, hey, it could come out of Howard. It sounds like you all, if any, it sounds like this, I mean, you all have a really good chance of it. So going back to, that's interesting too, that none of them really have a strong language component. So when you get what you can from the standardized tests, and you probably extrapolate what you can from that, knowing that some of it you have to let go if it's not, like you said, age or appropriate anymore. But are you really relying on those informal measures to look more closely at the language? Is that what does the informal piece of it look like?
Yeah, so the informal is really important, discourse sampling. Yeah. And a lot of people kind of shy away from that because it sounds really tedious. If you read the articles on Discourse, there's a lot of like counting and just a lot of things going on. But even doing a simple reading task and having conversation with your client will tell you so much.
Yes.
This is what I tell my students. If you know the domains of cognition and the domains of language, you know what attention, memory, executive functions look like, you know what expressive language and receptive language looks like, and you have a conversation with someone and you start to find that you can't follow or that they can't follow, then you can pick up on some of those cognitive and language challenges with reading and with conversational tasks. So it doesn't necessarily have to be what you see in the research, but you can pick up a lot on what they can and cannot do. If they're forgetting a lot, if they're losing track of attention. So discourse sampling is a major part. And you can just have regular conversation from that. Or athletes, ask them to tell you about one of their best highlights. They can talk all day. And so those are going to be really great ways. I also really like the method of motivational interviewing, because the style of motivational interviewing also, one, it gives you another way of looking at their discourse, right? How they're producing communication, but it also helps you to see, like, out of the things that you're seeing with them on the test, like what's important to them. And so that's also going to help you lead into like your goal writing.
Yeah. Oh gosh, you said so many things there that I just want to unpack a little bit. So it's just such a great reminder how we really, the formal and informal it's so critical, because I'm thinking we've all had that student or patient or client that, wow, they did great on the standardized test. And then you go have a conversation, you're thinking, wow, that I would have missed all that. And I'm also wondering too, I know, I did a very brief period of work in the beginning of my career with adults and TBI. And just that emotional piece was such a big component, but that wouldn't have shown up on a standardized test. So, but that really is going to impact their life. And so I love that you, and having them talk about something that is motivating, because I'm sure, especially, all kids or even adults, but especially at this age group, if it's not motivating, they're not going to do it. So I love that you're combining. Do you feel like, and your work, and then even when your students, are you finding that you're even getting more and better information from the informal than you are often from the formal with these students?
I think so. I think that the informal helps me understand better how to analyze what I see on the test. So when they're telling me, because one of the things that I didn't mention for informal, the post-concussion symptom scale, that's super important for athletes because they do experience a lot of physical symptoms, behavioral, plus the cognitive. And so when I see like that someone is like rushing through, they're rushing through and they're answering really, really quickly on something, even though they're getting it right. Like maybe they made some mistakes and then they had to go back and check it. But if they're telling me like, oh, well, sometimes when I'm in class, I start not feeling good. So I just want it to be over really quickly. Or, so then I know, oh, okay, so maybe there's some mental fatigue that's happening or some physical things that we need to take into account. So it all works together.
Yeah. And because I'm thinking too, that sometimes if you have the brain injury or the concussion, you may not know that you're having some of these symptoms. So it sounds like you do include, coaches, trainers, and others that are observing and know this student well enough to say, this is different, this is different.
Yeah, I remember one very interesting case I had, and it was a basketball player, and rate of speech was fairly slow, but I'm from the South, so I didn't think that much of it because I kind of talk like that too. And so, but the student never said anything about the way that they spoke. But then when I spoke to their mother, the mother said, my child's rate of speech is extremely slow. This is not how my child spoke before they had this injury. And so those kind of things just come in to be extremely helpful.
Yeah, that is so critical because, sometimes we don't recognize in ourselves. And again, especially if we're the one who's had the concussion or brain injury, it's like, nope, I'm good.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you also brought up something that I didn't realize. I had a friend that was in a car accident and had a concussion and then had to go to vision therapy for so long. And I'm thinking vision therapy. And so you alluded to that visual spatial. And I'm thinking how critical for a student athlete to have a good understanding of this, because if they don't, then they go back and play. If you have lost some of your visual spatial, sounds like you'd be more likely to get another injury.
That's exactly what it is. Because with part of the physical symptoms is that they could experience blurry vision, or they may see doubles.
Yeah.
And so vision therapy may be something that that is needed.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I was thinking, why are you in vision therapy? And it made such sense. Of course, it's the brain, good or bad, controls everything, right? So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about treatment. And so, you do the assessment. And I know this is different depending on, they're no two the same, but what does it usually look like? Do you establish goals with them? How are they measured? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I write the report, I'll write down my recommendations, but I always meet with the student and I go over the assessment report, and then I'll tell them like, oh, so these are some recommendations that I have. You tell me what you think you need to work on, or tell me what's important to you. And so that you will have already done the motivational interview, and that you should have some idea, but then they can confirm, because they could change their mind from what they told you at the assessment period. And so for some, because concussions can be very mild, like if it's the first one, and the symptoms have resolved themselves, it may just be that we're just going to monitor them for a little while and see how they do. For others, they may be performing extremely well, but they need accommodations to give them a little extra time, because maybe they still have physical symptoms and or they may experience some mental fatigue, and so they need some breaks in between, or a little more time on their tests. For those who do present with like cognitive impairments, I kind of take it by the domain. So what I tend to see a lot is difficulty with attention. Attention is a big one. And so a lot of them will say even, oh, when I'm having conversations with my friends, I often lose track of what the conversation was about. And so we may have to work with them on knowing when they may need to take a break. attention is one of the areas where you can drill, and drill works. And so you may have a goal where you work on drilling for attention with distractors, because the classroom is very distracting. Yes. We may say, okay, we want you to work on maintaining your attention on an assignment for 8 to 10 minutes. And if they do have mental fatigue, maybe we need to also have a goal that says you're going to utilize mindfulness strategies on some of your breaks, right? If it's memory, you can't really drill it like that, but it's a lot of strategy, compensatory strategy. So it's either internal memory aids, which might be like the verbal rehearsal, imagery, mnemonics, and things like that. But a lot of what we end up doing is the use of external devices. So using the apps, having the homework assignments, for schedules, whatever else that they need to do, the calendar. And then for executive functions, this could be a lot of different things. Yeah. But what I tend to see the most with my students is that they need support in organization and prioritization. And that's where you mentioned earlier the emotional piece, because they will have missed classes and then they're waiting for accommodations, and they have to catch up on old stuff, but they still have the current things that are coming up. And in college, if you miss 1 to 3 classes, it's almost a semester is done. And so what I tend to see is that they'll have a hard time trying to organize all the things that they need to do and how to prioritize. So we'll work on those kind of things. And so it does really depend on the student and what their needs are.
Well, and I love that it's also practical. So it's not, it's applicable to their life in that moment, but then also once they're done and, are going to find a job and do other things, is there some sort of format where they do get accommodations with their professors? Is there a letter or something sent where they may need extra time to do a test, or they may need to have some sort of special accommodations? Is that something that happens as well?
Yeah. And so at the college level, it's very interesting because, they don't get IEPs.
Yeah,
that's
what I was thinking.
But they can get accommodations. Okay. So the 504 plan still exists at the college
interesting.
level.
Okay.
And so, we have to, they have to have, that's why the SLP is so important, because it has to come from a licensed professional, the report and the request. The athletic trainers, as much as they would want to, they wouldn't accept it from them, right? And so, we're able to get them formal accommodations. Sometimes the process can be lengthy. And so the person from student services may reach out to professors and say, hey, we have this in process. If you can give them a little bit, but professors also, they don't have to unless they have that formal. But a lot of professors can be very accommodating. There's some every once in a while we, have some hard times with, but they can get formal accommodations. The student has to request it.
Okay.
So I will send in the report, but the request has to come from the student, and they have to request it every semester.
That is very interesting. I did not know that. And I also am thinking, wow, your model of how you're doing this, where you have a grad program there, this is a beautiful way to streamline those two areas, because SLPs would be so critical in this, and even more so because they can help to, if they need accommodations, can help them to get those. So,
and my students get to participate as well,
which I think is so cool. I would have loved that in grad school to be. I mean, what a learning experience. Now, do you have? Because I'm thinking, if I'm an athlete and I am, maybe even I have a scholarship or whatever, or I love playing this game. I get this concussion. Now I got to go do this. And that may mean that I don't get to play in some of these games. And if I'm a coach and that's one of my best players, it's like, now my player's not. Do you ever feel like there's pushback of having people come and receive these services because of that reason?
So, yeah. So with the students, when I first meet with them, and one of the reasons I like to do the consultation is so that I can stress to them that I don't get to make a decision when they return. Now, the team physician, the athletic trainers, they do take my opinion, but I don't clear them.
Okay.
And also, even if they need my services, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can't go back to the game. We just have to find the right time for them to go back. And so I try to stress that to them as much as I can. Most of them are pretty on board. And a lot of them appreciate the opportunity to get accommodations. Now, trying to get them to come to therapy is a lot more challenging. But there are some that do have a sincere fear that, if I'm seeing Dr. Davis, then they're going to tell me I'm not ready yet. The coaches, the staff has actually been like very, very on board. But also the way that we have our program set up, I don't necessarily always communicate directly with coaches. So it's kind of more with the athletic trainers. So the athletic trainers may experience more of the pushback. But I haven't really had to deal with much of that. But the coaches that I have had to interact with have been on board.
Gotcha.
Because they really care about the players. And so they want them to be whole and healthy before they come back.
Yeah.
So that's been a blessing here.
That's great, because I could see it going where it's like, no. But I do love that you it's like, here's the information, take it, do what you will with it, but you don't have to be the one making those challenging decisions, but helping provide the information for others to do so. So again, I know this is very not one size fits all, but what is a typical prognosis from a sports concussion? And I know that can vary based on mild to severe, but is there some sort of where you say, okay, 3 years out, this is typically what we see?
Yeah. So in most cases, the prognosis is good.
Okay.
There are people that go on to be medical doctors, doing all kinds of things after they have experienced concussion. What we do tend to see, though, is those who have experienced multiple injuries, they also tend to present with a greater severity of symptoms. And so for those individuals, we may see greater severity of challenges like down the road. Yeah. And that's really what we've been seeing with the stories of people who they've been finding the CTE in their brain. It's been multiple injuries, but also like this just, not great things happening throughout their life up until that point. But for the most part, the prognosis is good. So, so I think sometimes when we talk about concussion and I can see some students' faces like, oh my gosh, I had one. Am I going to get CTE? And I'm like, no, it doesn't necessarily mean that. But with repeated injuries over time, then we could see some different outcomes.
Yeah, it's you want to take care of your brain. I always say we only have one, and it doesn't like to be disturbed. So it is, and it's so tricky too, because isn't one of the predictors of a concussion or TBI is a concussion or TBI? Like once you've had one, it's like you're more likely to have another one. Is that still accurate?
The risk, it increases, it doubles, and then it triples, and
that doesn't seem fair, but it makes sense. So, and I really want to talk about now is just, you working with student athletes, and such an important topic you discuss is the racial bias for Black athletes and looking at brain injury and concussion. Can you talk a little bit about that and, what you see in your practice and research related to this?
Yeah. So there's been studies that mostly look at access to care, diagnosis with concussion. What we tend to see is that for Black athletes, The access to care is generally less than their counterparts, right? And that could be due to lack of insurance or finances, but it also has a lot to do with concussion education, where a lot of studies have shown like that the education is not always provided in every school system, in every place, right? And so we do tend to see that Black athletes may not be as aware of concussion symptoms as white students, right? Or even those who identify as Hispanic or Latino may not be as aware. And so also kind of going back to the standardized test.
Yeah.
If they're not included in the samples, then the test will not represent them very well either. And so what we tend to see a lot of times is that if these tests are used without any considerations of the communication differences, if it's just given just textbook style, then we get over-identification, we get misidentification a lot of times, and because the test won't account for various responses, they look for a specific method. And also, I think that athletes in general don't want to report their injuries. That's across the board. There's no racial factor to that. But what I do find with Black athletes, depending on their backgrounds, that there may be a greater fear if playing the sport is the sole reason that they're able to go to college, or that their sole reason for their finances, then there may be a different fear there. And then, of course, you know, we have like the challenges of just the mistrust of the healthcare system in general, that I think it is starting to change some. It's starting to change, slow, but I think that the more that these efforts of cultural responsiveness are coming into play, I think we'll start to see some differences.
Yeah, and I think just like you said, it really starts even with the coaches, with the communities, you know, where it is undoing so many bad things that were done, and helping again to rebuild that trust, have that education, that let's get some support with this, because nobody's ever offered to give me any money to play a sport. Let's put it that way. But, but I also, could imagine if I'm able to go to school because of that one particular activity, how scary that would be to think about that being taken away. Because in your mind, that's it. That's my opportunity. That's it. And so, helping, I think too, even like you said, that education for, hey, coming to receive support for this it's not the end. It's actually going to help that the outcomes ultimately will be better for you. And it doesn't mean you aren't going to play the sport anymore. And in fact, more bad than good could come out of not doing anything. But like you said, that trust has to be rebuilt, because for good reason, it's not there in a lot of communities. And I get it. I mean, I don't get it, but I completely understand why there'd be that mistrust. And so I'm sure a lot of it is just that education on your part for helping them see that, hey, this is a good thing. This is and helping others that work with the student to know it's a good thing, and everybody needs to be involved to make sure that each individual is getting the care that they need, regardless.
Yeah. But when they understand what is really happening to them, and they understand that it is the factor of their brain is injured and not that there's something wrong with them, it makes such a big difference. Because I had one student that was just like, I just want to know why I feel like this, and then once I was able to explain it, like from this very factual thing, it just made a world of difference.
Well, yeah, because we know it's like something's not right. And it's almost a relief to know, oh my gosh, it's real. It's not just imaginary. There's an actual reason for this. And so I'm sure you bring a lot of just peace with that information. And then it's like, okay, now that we know proactively what we can do to work through some of those things. And that probably also having a plan also probably helps reduce a lot of that anxiety based on this is the end. So,
yes.
And what can we as SLPs do in our own, communities? And if we're working with student athletes, and again, specifically to improve what has been done, how can we do better going forward with our Black, identified as Hispanic athletes and students in this area?
So that's a good question. So I had an article that came out in January, and it was on eliminating racial bias, or eliminating challenges for the Black athlete, right? And what the SLP clinician and researchers can do. And so in that, there's a whole section where I provide ways to break down barriers and increase your cultural responsiveness. And so I won't go through all of them, but I'll give you some. And so first, kind of getting back to that building trust with the athletes and coaching staff. Though that is major, because if they trust you, if they know that you know what you're talking about, one, but also know that you understand who they are, and you're not just trying to like force them to do something they don't want to do, they're more likely to want to work with you. I also suggest collaborating and connecting with clinicians and researchers who do this type of work, because cultural responsiveness and learning to be culturally competent is not an easy thing to do, and you can't just read a book and memorize and learn, right? You got to kind of talk to people so that you can get a better understanding of other people, and then engage in self-assessment of your own implicit biases. Different courses, readings that focus on DEI, that has become a requirement now. For renewing your certification, your license in certain states. I will do a plug for an organization I belong to, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
The Academy of Neurologic Communication Disorders and Sciences, ANCDS. I'm the chair of their Race, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. But a couple of my members, a very strong force in the DEI community, Sucheta Kamath, and another one of our members, Yaleen Pei, they have developed this self-study for looking at implicit bias and doing what we call ready work, the Race, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So that course is going to be launching soon from ANCDS. There's more that I listed in the article, but I don't want to take up too much time doing those things. But when it comes to racial ethnic groups, especially those who are very community-based, building community and building relationships is going to be the best way.
Yeah. Everything you just said, I love. And I'm going to take with me too that what you said about preferring, the terminology cultural responsiveness, because that means there's action to it. And that's truly where change happens. It's not, okay, good. I did the mandatory course that I had to do in order to get to renew this. That is great. And there's more, and it is that action, and it is, that we all need to take that action. And I think you're exactly right. Big part of that is understanding, what are my beliefs? What do I think? What do I know? Because I think a lot of us don't know. And once you do know, it's not to say, shame on you. It's to say, wow, I now know that I need to have more responsiveness with this. It's just, we know better, we do better. So, and we're going to link everything you just said in the show notes. So I love that the course that you talked about, the group, and then, so we'll put that in the show notes so that listeners can find that, because I think that is going to be really important. It sounds like an amazing opportunity. But where, if listeners want to learn more about you and what you're doing, where should they go to find this out?
Okay, so I'm on socials.
Yeah.
My Instagram is overall neuro _Dr.D. On Facebook, it's just overall neuro, and I'm trying to get into TikTok. On that one, I'm at Dr. A.S. Davis. But I also have a website. It's overallneurorehab.com. And I'll post it links to my social media where I post like the neuro news and different information about TBI, but I also share dates for my webinars and trainings. So I have 3 that are coming. I'm not sure when this episode is airing, but I have 3 in June that I'm hoping to put on demand as well. And then I do a 2-day It's All Neuro Brain Injury workshop multiple times throughout the year.
Oh, okay. So we will link all of that. We'll also add all that in there, but what a great opportunity. And I wish I was one of your students, but I don't want to go back to school. So
I get it. Well, those who are still going to school, apply to Howard and you can take my classes.
Yes. I'm just thinking, what a cool concept. I love what you're doing in your clinic and how that is such important work. And I really hope that anybody listening that works in a clinic or is a student, this needs to be in every grad clinic that has an athletic program. I think this is incredible. And I love that you're not only doing the work, but you're doing the research to see because if nobody's doing the research, we just keep doing the same thing and we don't know why.
Right.
So,
right.
Okay. Dr. Davis, this was so cool. I learned a lot from you, and thank you for all that you're doing. And just, again, I think whether you've been in the field for 20 years like myself, or if you're new grad, I think this is all such important information. And so thank you for your time today and your expertise. And that wraps up this episode. Thank you for tuning into SLP Full Disclosure. For more information about this episode, check out the show notes on our website at medtravelers.com/SLP Full Disclosure. And don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe so you never miss a guest. Are you interested in becoming a travel SLP? Visit medtravelers.com to learn more and explore the exciting opportunities we offer at top-level facilities across the country. Also, a special thanks to Jonathan Carey for producing this episode and Aiden Dykes for the music and editing. And as always, this episode was powered by Med Travelers. See you next time.